What really destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah? Was it fire from heaven because of a single sin? Or is the biblical truth far deeper, more uncomfortable, and more relevant to our world today than most people are willing to admit? This question has echoed for thousands of years, preached from pulpits, debated by scholars, and whispered in moments of doubt. Yet, despite how familiar the story of Sodom and Gomorrah may seem, very few people have actually stopped to examine what the Bible truly says about why those cities were judged. And here's the unsettling part. When you look closely at Scripture, the answer challenges popular beliefs, religious cliches, and even our modern assumptions about morality, judgment, and prophecy. You've probably heard the story before. Two ancient cities, consumed by divine fire, turned into symbols of God's wrath. But what if I told you that the most common explanation people give today is incomplete? What if the real message hidden in the biblical account is not only about the past, but also a prophetic warning that speaks directly to our generation? Stay with me, because what you're about to discover may completely change how you view the story. The Bible does not leave us guessing. In fact, it explicitly reveals the sins of Sodom and Gomorrah not through rumors, not through assumptions, but through clear prophetic language. And when we line up those scriptures, something remarkable happens. The fall of these cities begins to look less like an isolated act of judgment and more like a mirror held up to societies that drift away from God. Have you ever felt that uneasy sense that history might be repeating itself? You're not alone. As we explore the five sins of Sodom and Gomorrah, we're not just studying ancient ruins or distant moral failures. We're stepping into a biblical prophecy that continues to speak, warn, and confront. Pride, excess, indifference, corruption, these are not abstract concepts buried in the past. They are patterns, spiritual conditions that grow quietly, normalized slowly, and eventually lead to collapse. And that's exactly why this message feels so uncomfortable and so necessary. Maybe you've noticed how certain behaviors are no longer questioned. Maybe you've watched values shift, truth become relative, and humility replaced with arrogance. You might even have asked yourself, is this really what God intended? If so, you're asking the same kind of questions the prophets once asked, and the story of Sodom and Gomorrah exists in Scripture precisely so we wouldn't ignore those questions. What makes this even more powerful is that Jesus himself referenced Sodom when speaking about judgment and the last days. That alone should make us pause. Why would Christ point back to these cities if their story had no relevance beyond ancient history? This isn't about fear, it's about awareness. It's about understanding how societies fall, how warnings are ignored, and how patience eventually gives way to judgment. Fica comago ad o final, por cauda layer dessa historia revela algo novo, not just about Sodom, but about us. And as we move forward, you'll see that the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah was not sudden, random, or unjust. It was the result of a slow spiritual decay that the Bible carefully documents. The same decay that prophecy warns us about today. So before we go any further, ask yourself this. If God judged a city once for these sins, what happens when the same patterns appear again? That's exactly where our journey begins. There's an almost automatic idea when the name Sodom and Gomorrah is mentioned. Most people assume everything comes down to a single sin, repeated so often that it became accepted truth. But here lies a hidden truth that is rarely explored. The Bible is far more precise, deeper, and more unsettling than this simplified version. When we carefully examine Scripture, we realize the problem didn't begin with one isolated act, but with a corrupted mindset formed over time, shaped by wrong decisions, silent pride, and a moral transformation that happened slowly, almost unnoticed. Now, I want to go even deeper into the subject, because the contrast between what people believe and what the biblical text actually reveals completely changes the impact of the story. In the background of the scriptures, powerful revelations emerge, explaining why judgment became inevitable and why this message still carries weight today, influencing mentalities, choices, and spiritual journeys. Write in the comments, This makes sense to me. To understand this properly, we have to go back to the source itself. The idea of the five sins doesn't come from speculation or later interpretations, but straight from Scripture. In Ezekiel 16:49-50, the Bible pulls back the curtain and exposes the true foundation of Sodom's downfall with striking clarity. It speaks of attitudes, choices, and a mindset that slowly reshaped an entire society. This passage reveals the hidden structure behind the collapse, the inner transformation that happened long before the fire ever fell. Now, I want to go even deeper into the subject, because when we read these verses carefully, we realize this wasn't just history, it was a warning encoded in truth. These words carry impact, revealing how small decisions grow into collective behavior and how spiritual blindness forms in the background. This moment in Scripture sets the stage for everything that follows, opening a journey of understanding that demands reflection. Write in the comments. I see it more clearly now when Ezekiel exposes the heart of Sodom. The first thing that surfaces is pride. Not loud arrogance, but a deep sense of self-sufficiency that slowly pushed God out of the picture. This city believed it had no need for divine guidance, no accountability beyond itself. Pride reshaped its mentality, influencing decisions, redefining truth, and creating the illusion of control. Over time, that mindset became normal, even celebrated. Now, I want to go even deeper into the subject, because pride doesn't appear overnight, it grows quietly in the background, transforming how people see themselves and others. The real impact is subtle, authority is questioned, humility is dismissed, and ego takes the center of the journey. That's when a society begins exalting itself above God without even realizing it. Write in the comments. This opened my eyes after pride took root. Something else began to grow alongside it: excess. Scripture shows that Sodom lived in abundance, surrounded by comfort, luxury, and prosperity, yet completely disconnected from gratitude or reverence toward God. Wealth reshaped their mentality, shifting priorities and dulling spiritual awareness. Prosperity, instead of producing responsibility, created distance from truth, from humility, from compassion. Now, I want to go even deeper into the subject, because excess is rarely seen as dangerous when life feels comfortable. But behind the scenes, abundance without gratitude transforms values, influences decisions, and slowly erodes discernment. When comfort becomes the goal, fear of God fades, and moral boundaries begin to blur. This kind of transformation doesn't feel like rebellion at first, it feels like success, and that's what makes its impact so powerful and deceptive. Write in the comments. This makes sense to me. As abundance increased, something essential was quietly lost: compassion. Ezekiel reveals that Sodom ignored the poor and the needy, not because they lacked resources, but because their hearts had shifted. Indifference became part of their mentality, shaping decisions and dulling empathy. When comfort dominates a society, suffering starts to feel distant, almost invisible. Now, I want to go even deeper into the subject, because this kind of neglect doesn't appear cruel at first, it hides behind routine and convenience. In the background, a slow transformation takes place, where helping others feels optional and responsibility fades. Throughout the Bible, prophetic voices consistently connect justice with faith, showing that ignoring the vulnerable always carries consequences. This reveals a powerful truth. Spiritual decay often shows itself not in what a society does loudly, but in what it quietly stops caring about. Write in the comments. I'm reflecting on this when pride, excess, and indifference settle in. Moral corruption doesn't arrive as a shock, it feels like a natural progression. In Sodom, shame slowly disappeared, not overnight, but through countless small shifts in mentality and values. What once felt wrong began to feel normal, even justified. Now, I want to go even deeper into the subject, because this kind of transformation is rarely recognized while it's happening. Moral boundaries erode quietly, decisions become driven by desire rather than truth, and conscience loses its weight. This wasn't the starting point of Sodom's downfall, but the visible outcome of everything that by the time Scripture uses the word abomination, the picture is already fully formed. In the Bible, this term doesn't describe a single mistake or a moment of weakness, but practices that openly challenge God's order and purpose. It reflects a point where distortion replaces design and truth is exchanged for self-defined meaning. Agere euquero aer ainda mais profundo nes assunto, because understanding this word reveals how far the transformation had gone. An abomination is the outcome of repeated decisions, hardened mentalities, and ignored warnings. It's what emerges when pride, excess, indifference, and moral decay converge into something that no longer seeks alignment with God at all. This is not about shock value, but about revelation, seeing how a society crosses a line it no longer recognizes. And once that line disappears, the impact reaches far beyond behavior, touching identity, purpose, and destiny itself. Write in the comments, "This is eye-opening, came before." The real damage was already done in the heart, behind the scenes, long before actions reflected it. That's what makes this revelation so unsettling and impactful. Write in the comments, "This made me think when all these elements come together, judgment no longer feels sudden or harsh, it becomes inevitable." God's response to Sodom wasn't impulsive, but the result of long patience and repeated warnings that went ignored. Scripture shows a God who observes, waits, and gives space for change, even as transformation moves in the wrong direction. Agere euquero aer ainda mais profundo nes assunto, because the story also reveals mercy in the middle of decline. Abraham's intercession exposes the heart of God, a willingness to spare, to listen, to respond if even a remnant remained. But when decisions harden, mentalities close, and truth is consistently rejected, justice eventually follows. This moment isn't about anger, but about consequence, the natural impact of a journey that refused correction. And that realization opens the door to an even deeper reflection that continues from here. Write in the comments, "This perspective changed something for me." At this point, the story stops being only about ancient cities and starts feeling uncomfortably close. When Jesus and the prophets referenced Sodom, it wasn't nostalgia, it was warning. The same patterns resurface when mentalities shift, when decisions prioritize comfort over truth, and when transformation moves without discernment. Agere euquero aer ainda mais profundo nes assunto, because prophecy is less about dates and more about direction. The question quietly rises, are we repeating the same journey, just with different names and modern language? In the background of our world, the same signals appear: pride reframed as self-expression, excess normalized as success, indifference hidden behind distraction. These revelations don't accuse, they invite reflection. They challenge us to examine impact, purpose, and alignment before consequences unfold again. Write in the comments, "I'm reflecting on this."